The Hampstead Murder by Christopher Bush. It can be an absorbing undertaking, when the means are available, to trace to their original sources events which have proved momentous, and to discover how trivial were the small beginnings that set them in motion. Even the hydrogen bomb can be traced directly back to a murder in Sarajevo. All our lives are shot through with the most incredible of coincidences. You happen to change the direction of a walk, and you meet someone who changes the direction of your life. The Hampstead murder was a case in point. A man in Scotland wrote a letter to the Times, and by chance the Times found it interesting enough to print. Because of that letter, which had nothing whatever to do with murder, a woman was strangled in a London suburb. You may not recall that murder. It created no excitement and never got into the headlines. The woman was found with a noose around her neck, and the killing could have been accomplished in a matter of seconds. As murders go, it was exceptionally swift and abrupt. Considering its ownership, there was nothing unusual about the room where she was found. It smelled faintly of potpourri, and its charming furniture included some delightful period pieces. Its china and pictures had quality. Its carpet was Chinese, and its chairs were Chesterfield soft and seductive. Then there was the woman, in a charming afternoon frock, with a face like a surprised Madonna, and hair like an aureola. She was wearing about £1,000 worth of jewellery, which would unquestionably have proved tempting, in short, to a burglar. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle, no vulgarity, but everything quiet and restrained, except for that deadly circle around her neck. Even the murderer was only a part of that general background, a quiet man, writing peacefully at a Queen Anne bureau. Later, of course, there was to be the comparative vulgarity of a trial, even if it ended in a matter of minutes, with the knowledge that the murderer was hopelessly insane. And the reason of it all, let me repeat, was a letter that was written to the Times. To get to that letter, we must leave the charm of that drawing-room in Hampstead and come nearer town to Porter Street, Mornington Crescent. In Victorian times, the Crescent had dignity and aloofness. Porter Street still retained something of that dignity, even if its Georgian houses had become offices and flats. It was in one of these flats that Lutley Prentice was working on a certain June morning. It would be more true to say that he should have been working. In front of his swivel chair were table and typewriter, but he sat there with the tips of his fingers together, and his brow wrinkled in thought. You would have needed no particular shrewdness to have guessed that he was a writer. But he was a writer with a difference. His name was far from well known. He had 3 novels to his credit, 2 having as their theme extramarital intrigue, and the other concerned with one of those coteries to be found on the French Riviera. The last one had sold quite well, a matter of gratification to its author, purely from pride of workmanship. Money is always useful, but his private income was about £2,000 a year after taxes, and the handsome royalties he received from his publisher made no great difference. The fact of the matter was that he had drifted into writing almost without knowing it, and primarily to escape from boredom. The first 2 years after his marriage had been a routine of which he had tired. Switzerland in midwinter, the Riviera in spring, golf in England in the summer, and weekends at various house parties, with a week or 2 at Deauville or Le Touquet in early autumn. After that, town, the club, theatres, and the multitudinous rush and jigsaw fitting in from morning till night. All that was the life that suited Dorothy Prentice so well. At golf, Lutley was a shaky 16. She could give a low-handicap man a good game, and from the men's tees at that. Her tennis was almost first class. She played a really good hand at bridge, a bit aggressive, perhaps, but rarely a loser, unless cards and partners were impossible. Lutley was a cautious bidder, if ever there was one. He was good, however, for what he said, and never less. But he took things less seriously. In golf, the game counted, not the figures. Or at least, that was how things had been before his marriage. Maybe it was the almost venomous earnestness with which Dorothy did things that first began to make them pall. In some ways, you might have thought them an ill-sorted couple. He was short and sturdy, with quiet brown eyes, and a kind of intellectual shyness. She was tall for a woman, handsome in a glittering way, and with qualities that would have made for attractiveness, only to a man quite different from Prentice. Knowledge of the jargons and sporting chatter, and with it that shrewd judgment that knows when to be only a highly ornamental background. At Cambridge, Lutley had read history, and, until his marriage, had contributed occasionally to various reviews. That particular writing had been a part of his leisure, but later, when the hectic life of his first married years had begun to seem aimless and even boring, he had thought with regret of the pleasure his earlier labours had given him. Out of it had come his attempt at a first novel, and its publication. All this was just before the last war, when money was money, and life less demanding. As for his marriage, he'd met Dorothy at the house of George Foster, an old Cambridge friend. And it so happened that she had been at school with George's wife, Miriam. Dorothy's father had just died. He'd been vicar of Purfield Warren, and she'd come into a reasonable sum of money. 6 months after that first meeting, they were married. He was then 31, and she 28, though she claimed to be younger. It was a love match on his side, if not on hers. Her friends agreed that he had married a most attractive woman. Her enemies that she'd done exceptionally well for herself. But it would have been hard to judge objectively the success or otherwise of that marriage. Lutley one could see through. The woman he had wed was far more inscrutable. In public, a softly murmured "darling" and a playful tap are no particular signs, especially when the other hand holds a liqueur glass drained for the 8th time. When Prentice, at first, and almost surreptitiously, returned to his writing, his wife seemed neither to mind nor to be interested. After all, she had plenty of outside interests. On her first discovery of his new activity, it had been, "Darling, how frightfully clever of you." And then, at intervals, "Oh, you poor dear, I hate to see you working so hard. Why don't you stop now and rest?" Then, on the publication of his first novel, "Darling, it's too frightfully thrilling for anything." Thereafter, it might have been said by the unkind that her tolerance or possible encouragement of his efforts was not unconnected with material considerations. But Prentice apparently doted on her, and generously provided that his earnings should be hers in the form of special presents. But the spring of 1947 had seen a slight deterioration in the warmth and closeness of their relationship. He was engaged on a new book, which he definitely knew was good, and he refused to take his work to the Riviera. Dorothy had, however, kept to the routine, and had gone to Menton with a small circle of friends that included Peter Clare and Miriam Foster. Clare, a handsome country club-type man of about 35, was a very old friend. Prentice, in his own undemonstrative way, was very fond of him. The Prentices saw a lot of him when he was in town, and he often dined at the Hampstead house. It was because he did not want to keep that house open during his wife's absence that Prentice had taken that Porter Street flat. Dorothy was away till the very end of May. And then something happened. Her only sister had been taken seriously ill, and she'd gone down to Carnford to be with her. That was not so unsettling for Prentice as it might have been, for the book was not quite finished. A few days would see it with the publisher, and he stayed on at the flat. In the morning he usually put in his best work, but that particular morning he was annoyed and worried over what seemed a very trivial thing. Before him was the morning's edition of the Times, and it was at a certain letter that he was scowling. A policeman had written rather indignantly on the treatment of his profession by writers of detective novels. The police, he affirmed, were treated like buffoons, and authors rarely troubled to make themselves familiar with the real workings of either Scotland Yard or the CID departments of provincial forces. But it was not the police and their methods that were worrying Lutley Prentice, but the whole principle which the letter called in question. He himself had always been careful to use in his books such local colour as had been familiar, and things with which he had had at least a working acquaintance. But in that novel, now almost finished, he had brought in something with which he was not familiar at all: a private detective agency. The chapter that dealt with it had been written, and he had taken a great deal for granted, not caring much whether or not an absolute verisimilitude had been achieved. A detective agency, for instance, would have an office. Well, such offices were surely pretty much alike, and in his novel its appearance had been guessed at. And so with the head of the firm, and the conversation, and all the things that go to make what one calls local colour. Some people would have regarded the whole thing as utterly unimportant. There could be little connection between that letter and the chapter in question. They would have argued that a private detective was most unlikely to read that particular chapter, and that the man in the street, provided the book as a whole kept him reading into the small hours, would not care the proverbial twopence about the niceties of local colour. But such a view was contrary to Prentice's meticulous mind. He was also a man of impulses and curious obstinacies. That was why he suddenly made up his mind that the right thing to do would be to visit a detective agency and check up that chapter in the light of such new impressions as he might form. But the resolve brought also an annoyance. There was the chance that his guesses in that chapter had been reasonably correct, and that the chapter would not have to be rewritten. But whether that was so or not, time would be wasted, and just when he was fired with the urge to finish the book. To ignore the letter seemed sheer carelessness. That letter from the policeman might start a spate of inquiries into local colour. Heaven knew what people and professions would be writing to the press about the gross errors they had unearthed. He could almost see one such letter. "Dear Sir, referring to the matter of local colour, I was very amused to find in a novel by Lutley Prentice entitled Tingling Symbols a statement that—" In any case, that morning he was unable to settle down to work, and just before noon he went along to his club. He ran into George Foster, and they lunched together. "Was that Peter Clare I saw getting into a taxi just as I came in?" Prentice happened to ask. "That's right," George said. "I was talking to him just before. He's going down to Cambridge tomorrow to play for the Pilgrims against the Wanderers, a 2-day match. Did you want to see him?" "Well, in a way, yes. I wanted him to give me an introduction to his brother. He's a chief constable, as you probably know, and I hoped he might give me some local colour and save some rather tiresome inquiries." George Foster was probably the only man to whom he would have told that morning's worries. George didn't seem at all unhappy about it. "I don't think a chief constable would help very much," he said. "Why not go to the Fountainhead? I know a really good firm of private detectives who did an excellent job for a friend of mine. You go along and see them. Just make up some yarn or other. Just a simple job that won't cost very much. That ought to give you the whole bag of tricks." Foster happened to remember the name of the firm and the approximate address, and that Friday afternoon Prentice made a bold decision and went to Tooke Street. The taxi driver happened to know the number, and on a door on the first floor Prentice found what he wanted. Herring and Holt, Private Inquiry Agents. He knocked, and the door was opened with instant and agreeable promptitude by a receptionist. "Can I see one of the principals, please?" he asked. "Take a seat, sir, please," the young lady replied. "I think Mr. Holt is free. Have you a card?" A couple of minutes, and he was in Holt's room. It was a smallish office, crammed with filing cabinets and reference books. There was the usual flat-top desk and swivel chair. Holt, a dapper-looking youngish man, rose and held out a hand. "How do you do, Mr. Prentice? Take a seat, will you? A cigarette? And what precisely may we do for you?" "Well, Holt smiled reassuringly. "Secrets are safe with us, sir. We're used to handling affairs of the utmost delicacy and in the strictest of confidence. You can rely on us implicitly." Prentice had to think quickly. The thoughts he had had were now in thin air. It would be crude to admit that he was in that room solely for the purpose of picking brains. When he did speak, it was only to make time. "It's a fairly trivial matter," he said. "Doesn't matter to us, sir," Holt assured him. "Whatever the work, we can undertake it, and in strict confidence." His manner was suave and impressive. Prentice thought of the use he had made in his novel of an imaginary detective agency, and decided on something along the same lines. "Well," there was still a certain diffidence in his manner, "I take it you're prepared to keep people under observation? Not necessarily to do with divorce, of course." "Most certainly." He drew a pad towards him, and the pen was poised. "Name, sir?" he inquired. "Lutley Prentice." Holt smiled. "Not your name, sir," he said. "The name of the person it will be our task to watch." Prentice smiled too, but not at that mistake he had made. An idea had come to him, and wrapped up in it were all the elements of the ludicrous. "Ah, yes, of course. The name is Peter Clare. Address? 3 Oudenarde Mansions, Kensington." "And what exactly do you want, sir?" "And when?" "Well, just a report in confidence by Monday of what he does from now until then. You can manage that?" "Most decidedly." "Where do you wish the report delivered?" "At 5B, Porter Street, Mornington Crescent. About noon, if you can manage it." That was virtually all. As he walked down the stairs, Prentice was both gratified and mildly amused. He had been in the office of a detective agency, and what he had seen and heard would involve only minor alterations in the carefully written chapter. As to the amusement, it would certainly be uproariously funny if Peter, during his stay in Cambridge, discovered that a private detective was on his heels. And then suddenly he halted and frowned. Annoying, too. The least thing he could do was to get hold of Peter and warn him. A knowledge of what was going to happen would make the joke the property of Peter, as well as of himself. From his flat he rang Oudenarde Mansions. Clare's man, Daniels, answered the telephone. Mr. Prentice was just a few minutes too late. Mr. Clare had just left by taxi. Yes, Daniels was certain he had gone to Cambridge. He'd definitely taken his golf bag and a weekend suitcase. "You know the hotel he'll be staying at?" Prentice asked. "I don't, sir," Daniels said. "All I know is that he'll be back early on Monday." So that was that. Though Prentice was still glad he'd hit on Clare as a stalking horse for Holt's detective. A less intimate friend of the family would be highly indignant when he learned what had been going on. And Clare would learn, though now he must wait until Monday. So Prentice sat down at the typewriter and wrote, for Clare's exclusive enlightenment, an account of the whole thing. And that's how it happened. It will be extremely amusing if you chance to spot the sleuth. In any case, I'll send you the report, innocuous though it will be. Until Monday, then. Yours as ever, Lutley. P.S. Why not have dinner with us on Monday? I'm expecting Dorothy back from Carnford. Her sister's much better. He went out at once and mailed the letter, and as he walked back to the apartment, he wondered if Peter's reactions would be altogether what he himself had expected. Not that Peter hadn't a sense of humour, in a rather hearty way. That evening he worked hard at the detective agency chapter, and rewrote where the afternoon's call on Holt seemed to require it. By Saturday he had the chapter well in hand, and that afternoon he treated himself to a matinee. In the evening he dined at his club, and then went back to his apartment and outlined the final chapter of his novel. On the Sunday morning he went to the Hampstead house. Dorothy had everything arranged. Lunt, butler and general man, was there, as were the cook and the maid. It was from the house that he rang Carnford Hall. Phipps, the butler, answered. "I'm sorry, sir, but Mrs. Prentice isn't back yet from church. She should be in at any moment." "Oh, yes, sir. The mistress is practically herself again. The doctor's very pleased. Oh, just a moment, sir. I think I hear Mrs. Prentice now." A minute later, Dorothy Prentice was on the line. "Oh, that's you, darling. How sweet of you to ring." "Oh, yes, I'll be back early in the morning. I'm glad you found everything as it should be. But you shouldn't have asked Peter to dinner. Well, I'd been looking forward to us having our evening together alone." "A special reason?" Well, we might find some special excuse and put him off. He won't mind. Till tomorrow then, darling. Bye." Bright and early on Monday, Holt himself arrived at the Porter Street apartment. He was like a man who had been given a job to do and knew that he had done it well. From an unsealed envelope, he produced several closely typed sheets. Prentice gave them a glance, tried to look impressed, and asked how much. Holt's account was for just over £18, and Prentice wrote him a cheque. It was a lot of money, Prentice thought ruefully, for the view of an office and a few minutes with Holt. It rather looked, in fact, as if Peter would have the laugh. Which reminded him, Peter would be at Oudenarde Mansions, and he'd better be rung up at once. And then Prentice couldn't help wondering just how that sleuth of Holt's had got to work, and he took the typed sheets from the envelope and began casually to read. The party was picked up almost on arrival, and followed to Liverpool Street Station, where he took the train for Wenton Junction. He was met by a small black sedan, driven by a lady, and the car was followed to Justin Friars, 6 miles away, where it entered the grounds of a smallish country house, known as Friars' House. Phillipson followed me, and he and I shared the supervision from then on. Prentice stopped reading. He had wondered why Peter had not gone to Cambridge, and he smiled to himself, as he knew why. After all, Friars' House was Peter's, and Justin Friars was only some 20 miles from Cambridge. He knew it well enough. He had been there once or twice, when he and Dorothy had been staying at Carnford Hall. It wasn't more than a 10-minute run in a car. As for the woman, she was probably Peter's married sister. Or wasn't she still in India? Maybe she and her husband were home on leave. Curiosity made him read on. There seemed to be no servants whatever in the house, but observation was difficult. The couple did not appear until about 8:30 that evening, when they walked round the lawns and the borders and back through the long walk to the house. The woman was tallish, fair, and about 30 by all appearances. Once or twice the couple were seen to embrace during their tour of the garden. Prentice was horrified. The woman was definitely not Peter's sister, and who she might be he had no idea. What he did know was that in beginning a joke, he had committed an enormity. He had intruded unwarrantably into another man's private life, and the fact that it had been done under a lamentable misapprehension would not make it appear the less reprehensible. His face was flushed as he realized what he must at once do. He rang Oudnard Mansions, and it was Daniels who answered. "Sorry, sir, but the master's just gone away." "Away? What do you mean?" "What I said, sir. He got back about 11 o'clock, and almost at once he ordered me to pack his bags for the south of France. He didn't know how long he'd be away." "Well, good heavens, any idea why he went off like that?" "No idea at all, sir," Daniels replied. "Very extraordinary," Prentice said. "There should have been a letter for him from me asking him to dinner tonight. Did he read it? It was on pale blue paper." "Oh, yes, sir, I remember it. He read it as soon as he came in." "Very extraordinary," Prentice said again. "Let me know as soon as you hear anything from him." "I will, sir," Daniels promised. Prentice hung up. He was angry, and he was worried. What on earth could have possessed Claire to have made him go off like that? If it was that letter, then he surely should have had sense enough to know that his secrets were implicitly safe. He picked it up and once more began reading. A light went on in a bedroom at about 10 o'clock, and we brought a ladder from the garden and placed it near the open window. When the lights went out, we had to act with enormous care, but hearing was perfect. There were the following scraps of conversation. 1. "Are you sure Phipps can be trusted?" "Yes," the woman said. "I'll square it with him on Sunday morning again. I'll have to be there in any case when he," name not identified, "rings. He'll be sure to ring about noon." 2. "Darling, we'll have to be most careful from now on. You really mustn't go making faces at me behind his back." He is apparently the unidentified name of 1. "It's all rather funny in a way," Claire said. "He's not a bad old stick, really. I don't think we'll be running any risk." Something had already stood still with Luckley Prentice. He read the rest of those sheets, and as if his eyes no longer saw any words. When he laid the last sheet down, he stood for a moment, hand gripping the table, and his face a queer grey. At first his movements seemed rational. He took the tube to Hampstead, and made his way to his house, and spoke rationally enough to the staff. Mrs. Prentice had gone out for a moment, he was told, but should be back practically at once. He went out himself, and at a music shop bought a gut cello string. When he came back, Mrs. Prentice was there. 5 minutes later, Lunt brought in tea. He found Mrs. Prentice lying dead on the carpet, and Prentice sitting writing at that Queen Anne bureau. Lunt, white-faced and aghast, could get no answer from him. So he ran out to the road and got a message to the police. When they came, it was still as if Prentice did not hear. He let them take him by the arm and lead him away. The sergeant had a look at that paper on which he had been writing. "Heavenly days! Have a look at this, Inspector. What do you suppose it means?" The inspector had a look. It didn't mean anything to him, either. It was just a phrase, written over and over again. To the editor of the Times, "Dear Sir." Christopher Bush. Charles Christmas Bush was born on Christmas Day, 1888, at Home Cottage in Hockham, a village in Norfolk in the east of England. Christmas Bush, as he was known as a child, was of Quaker descent, and his family had lived in the area for over 400 years. He was educated in the village school, and in 1899 won a 3-year scholarship to Thetford Grammar, where he gained distinctions in religious knowledge, English and geography, while winning prizes for English and German. In 1902, he won a further 2-year scholarship, and in 1903 his form prize. Outside school, Bush was a competent sportsman, playing competitive drafts and opening for the village cricket team. He also sang with his friend Ernest Hensley at the Primitive Methodist Chapel, alongside his sister Hilda and her friend Ella Pinner, whom Bush would eventually marry. In 1904, despite his Quaker upbringing, Bush secured a temporary position as assistant master at a Catholic school in North Worcestershire. In 1905, he returned to Norfolk to be an assistant master at Swaffham Boys' School, and he became a published author when Life in the Black Country appeared in the Norwich Mercury. He resumed singing at chapel and also played cricket, opening for Swaffham Singles and, lower down the order, for Great Hockham Reading Room, a team that included his brothers in conviction, the two Ernests. Later that year, Bush matriculated as an undergraduate at King's College London, where he studied modern languages, and on graduating, he returned to teaching, this time at a school in Wood Green, North London. Around this time, Bush also married Ella Pinner, although what happened next is unclear. Curtis Evans, the authority on Bush and other Golden Age writers, has determined that while the two remained married until Ella's death in the late 1960s, they do not appear ever to have lived together. Evans has also established that when Bush returned from 4 years military service during the First World War, including a year in Egypt, he returned to Wood Green School and fathered a child by a teaching colleague, Winifred Chart. Their son, born out of wedlock in 1920 and largely unacknowledged, would grow up to become the composer Geoffrey Bush, co-author with Edmund Crispin of the excellent puzzle short story Who Killed Baker? Romantic entanglements aside, teaching had always been Bush's ambition. However, he did not find it fulfilling, and in the mid-1920s, as the result of a bet, he wrote a novel, which much to his delight was accepted and published. Set in 1919, The Plumley Inheritance, 1926, concerns a treasure hunt and a mysterious murder, which proved to be connected. While not uncriticized by contemporary reviewers, Mr. Bush has two strings to his bow, and the story might have been a better one if he had restricted himself to one, the book sold well. It was followed by The Perfect Murder Case, 1929, whose manuscript the publisher required Bush to halve in length, and then two titles in 1930, Dead Man Twice in the summer and Murder at Fenwold for Christmas. Buoyant, Bush decided in 1931 to become a full-time writer, and he eventually produced over 70 books, including some 60 novels as Christopher Bush. These feature several recurring characters, including Major Ludovic Travers, who appears in all of them, and have been reprinted by Dean Street Press. Many of the best are set in English villages, but Travers also solves crimes in France in The Case of the Three Strange Faces, 1933, The Case of the Flying Ass, 1939, and The Case of the Climbing Rat, 1940. Bush also wrote 4 excellent Second World War mysteries, including 3, The Case of the Murdered Major, 1941, The Case of the Kidnapped Colonel, 1942, and The Case of the Fighting Soldier, 1942, that were partly inspired by his time at C-19, a D-Day marshalling camp on Southampton Common in Hampshire, and also his service with the Home Guard, which, Curtis Evans has established, included serving as an officer at Pennilyn's prisoner of war camp in Ayrshire. Writing success brought wealth, and in the early 1930s, Bush fulfilled a promise to his mother by buying the cottage where he had been born. He added 2 wings, transforming it into Home Hall, which is now a boutique hotel. He also bought Horsepen, a 15th-century house in the village of Beckley in East Sussex, where he would live with his partner Marjorie Barclay for around 20 years. While Bush is best remembered for the crime fiction published under his own name, he also wrote a Ruritanian adventure, The Trail of the Three Lean Men, 1932, published as by Noel Barclay, combining a variant of his given forename and Marjorie's surname. He adopted another pen name, the euphonious Michael Home, for a series of novels set in and around the East Anglian village of Heathley, a thinly disguised version of his birthplace. The first of the series, known as the Breckland novels, God and the Rabbit, 1933, is a semi-autobiographical story about a boy who wins scholarships and becomes a schoolmaster while supporting his straight-laced mother from London and his dissolute father, a poacher. In later years, Bush would claim that, as had happened with The Perfect Murder Case, the publisher had required the manuscript of God and the Rabbit to be cut by half. True or not, the novel was very well received, and a second quickly followed. In This Valley, 1934, is a melodrama about a Methodist farmer and his son, an ambitious man with two women in his life, suggesting autobiographical elements in this novel too. In all, there are around 20 Michael Home novels, including David, 1937, a biblical biography, and 3 overtly autobiographical books, Autumn Fields, 1945, Spring Sowing, 1946, and Winter Harvest, 1967. As well as the Breckland series, there were several Home novels involving Britain's military intelligence services, including 2 featuring Major John Benham of MI5, The Strange Prisoner, 1947, and The Auber File, 1953. In 1941, after leaving the Home Guard, Bush made headlines locally for restoring the medieval wood carvings on the exterior of Horsepen, working to a Tudor design as specified by advisors from the Victoria and Albert Museum. He was also active in civic matters in the nearby town of Hastings as a member of the 20 Club, for men and women prominent in literature or art. And he was a patron of local artists and galleries, on one occasion donating to an exhibition a portrait of Mr. Michael Home by Mr. Christopher Bush. And he was also prominent in the Detection Club, to which he had been elected in the late 1930s. In the early 1950s, Bush and Marjorie moved to the Great House in Lavenham in Suffolk, where, while continuing to write, he again became a pillar of the community, opening art exhibitions and giving talks about being a writer. A modest man, Bush had no time for what he called literary arrogance, seeing himself as simply a public entertainer whose chief duty is to be thoroughly competent at whatever line of writing he decides to adopt. But while many of Bush's novels have good ideas and interesting settings, others seem to some to fulfill the criticism levelled at lesser lights of the Golden Age by H.R.F. Keating, a former president of the Detection Club, that their work is characterized by ingenuity of plot, cardboardity of character, and chunter of story. Nonetheless, Bush remains popular, and has been praised in particular for his ability to create and deconstruct the unbreakable alibi, a trait shared with the alibi king himself, Freeman Wills Crofts. With Marjorie's death in 1968, Bush lost his enthusiasm for writing. He died on the 21st of September 1973, at the age of 84. One of 2 versions of The Hampstead Murder, this text was published in the November 1955 issue of The Saint magazine. The Scarecrow Murders by Joseph Commings. It was the murder that drew Senator Brooks U. Banner to Cow Crossing, a town in the upper reaches of New York State. The study of crime had been Banner's hobby for years. Now Banner, a whopping big man, stood before the flimsy office door over the post office and gave it a brisk drubbing. The molting gold leaf lettering on the door read, Judge James Z. Skinner. Skinner himself opened the door. Behind him, his office was stuffy and smelled of moldering papers. Dusk was shadowing all the corners, and Skinner had been getting ready to close up shop for the day. Skinner recognized Banner at once, probably from Banner's many colorful political billboards. "Senator Banner," said Skinner, half surprised and half delighted. He spoke with a fruity voice. "Yes-sirree, bub. Life-size, in a flesh, full of beans, and raring to go." Banner chuckled and came in. A liver-colored leghorn was pushed back on his grizzled mane. He carried his frock coat over his arm, for the evening was still too warm to wear it. His silk shirt was mottled with sweat. He stood up straight, but his baggy gray breeches looked ready to sit down. On his feet were a pair of brogans spotted with clay. "I just horse and buggied into your burg, friend," he said with a boom. "I'm on a tub-thumping junket. After each sentence of my speech, I pitch a fork full of hay. That puts the farmers behind me 100%. I think I'm going to need the farm vote to carry me back to Washington this fall." Skinner bobbed his narrow head soberly. "Your oratory is welcome in the hinterlands. Demosthenes on the stump. Usus loquendi." He smiled bleakly. He was the law in Cow Crossing. He was in his 60s, long and weedy, with carefully parted gray hair and eyes like the heads of new tenpenny nails. Winter or summer, he wore an antique beaver hat that reminded one of an abdicated kingdom. It had a fallen crown. He had the hat in his hand. Banner eyed the old man sharply. "I was in the next town when I heard that Cow Crossing had been glorified with a murder. Tempted me like a kid is tempted with custard. I had to come. Puzzles have teased me ever since I tried to take my socks off with my baby booties still on. They tell me you're the Johnny I have to see." "Yes," said Skinner. "If there's any law in this place, I'm it. I'm the lex loci, so to speak. People see me when they're married, they see me when things go wrong, and they see me after they're dead, only then they don't care." He took a flat silver case out of his pocket. "A fresh cigar?" Banner remembered he had a Corona between his teeth. It looked as if the rats had been at it. He took it out of his mouth and glowered distastefully. "I'll own up to you," he said. "I never smoke cigars. It's all window dressing." He pegged the gnawed fag end into a spattered cuspidor. "About this murder, Judge, what's the score?" Skinner said there was not much to tell. He related all the known circumstances. In the shallows of the creek, some fishermen had discovered Beverly Jelks's body. Farther upstream, they found her clothes piled neatly on the bank. The body was in a common black bathing suit. Half her head had been blown away by the charge of a double-barreled shotgun. Apparently, the victim had been swimming about 10 feet offshore in the deep water near where her clothes were found. The murderer had fired from the heavy brake that overhung the banks at that point. Hudson Jelk was Beverly's younger brother by a year. He was in his early 20s, with a face as pasty as dough, shaggy-haired and unshaven. He had greedy eyes. He had lumbered into the mortuary that hot August afternoon and claimed the body. He had taken the dead girl's hand in his own. For a moment, the judge said, it looked like an affectionate gesture. But Hudson went ahead to strip the heavy ring off one of the fingers. Skinner had said, "Do you have to be so ghoulish, Hud? Can't you wait?" "It's an heirloom," responded Hudson. "It's mine now." When he left, Hudson had all Beverly's personal belongings. He went back to the farm, knowing that all of it belonged to him now. Banner shifted his feet in the gloomy office. "Got any wild guesses who killed Beverly Jelk?" "No idea." A little cough cleared Skinner's long throat. Then he went on, in a gossipy manner, about the Jelks. "This is a pretty sparsely populated region, Senator. The Jelk farm, they call it Black Marsh Grange, is about 8 miles out of town, and there are no farms in between. There were two Jelks, Beverly and her brother Hudson. Hudson married a French-Canadian girl from just over the border. There's an uncle living there, too, and a hired man. Banner waited. Skinner went on. Blackmarsh Grange is a big, sprawling place, named on account of the dismal quagmire that was originally on the land, but most of that has been filled in. In the last couple of years, the Jelkses haven't been happy. They produced merely enough to get by on, and the brother and sister have been having one long, hot argument. Banner was attentive. Argument. Skinner said, about selling the Grange. I offered them $5,000 for it, a fair price considering. Beverly wanted to sell right off and hire herself out of here and start fresh in one of the bigger cities. But Hudson was all against it. He had something to say about selling the farm, and he wasn't going to budge an inch. They came close to blows over it more than once. Banner grunted. Now that Beverly's dead, Hudson'll have it all his own way. Skinner's nail-head eyes dulled. He said slowly, That's the size of it. And, said Banner, you won't get the farm for love or money. Banner couldn't see Skinner's expression, for the judge had turned away to flick dust off a law tome with a flame-colored bandana. I'm anxious to see that crowd, went on Banner. Skinner looked at him. The Jelks? You mean you want to help me solve this murder? Banner shrugged his bulky shoulders. Skunks and rabbits, they have habits, he said. They rode up through the long lane of dark poplars in the judge's buggy with the wobbly top, pulled by a spavined horse. The old building spread over acres. Lights were on in the kitchen and the front parlor. Skinner, who had phoned the local constabulary and ordered no interference with Senator Banner's prowlings, had added a hawthorn stick to his rig since leaving the office. He courteously rapped the head of the stick on the front door. A girl in a printed house dress popped out at them. Come in, she said at once. They moved through double-sliding oak doors into the parlor. There was a heavy brass lamp on a tabletop that was glazed with turpentine and beeswax. In the light, Banner saw that the girl was small and slight. She had dark brown hair that she'd begun to neglect, and it was getting stringy. Her arms, bare from the elbows down, were sun-browned, till the skin looked like tan satin. Banner liked her wholesomeness. Skinner introduced her as Celeste Jelk, Hudson's wife. So, you're the little girl the judge has been telling tales about, said Banner as he shook her firm hand. She turned shyly away and called for Hud. The doughy-faced, shaggy young man with the greedy eyes tramped in and stared suspiciously at Banner as the judge made them known to each other. I'm sorry we can't offer you any supper, Senator, said Hudson coldly. We just finished. I'll raid your ice chest, Banner stated blandly. I'm needing a shakedown for the night. The hotel in town is full of drummers. Hudson's brow blackened. You're damn cagey, ain't you? We all know what you're up to. Come right out and say it's about Bev. Banner grinned. That's throwing in your blue chips, son. We understand each other. Trey bone, as we used to say to the Frenchies in a big war. We all want to see punished the person who killed your beloved sister. Hudson was brutal. I didn't love her. Celeste's hazel eyes grew round at his audacity. If everyone's as truthful as you, said Banner sourly, we won't have much trouble cleaning house. This is like catching another man with your wife. The situation calls for action. Celeste spoke up. I do have something to tell you. That double-barrel shotgun we kept behind the kitchen door, it's gone. Have you looked for it? Said Banner. High and low, Hudson replied. There was an uncomfortable silence. Then Banner said, "Haven't you got an uncle?" "He ain't here," said Hudson curtly. "He's out, prowling around." He made it sound sinister. A sinewy young man in overalls came into the parlor. His hair and eyebrows were bleached by the sun. He stopped and took a smoke-blackened clay pipe out of his mouth and looked at the others with blank, ocean aqua eyes. Celeste said quickly, "Senator, this is our hired man, Wayne Marks." "Howdy do," said Wayne. Hudson seemed to take a perverse delight in making others uneasy. He said, "Wayne's got things on his mind, Senator. He's thinking all the time about that girl student over at Fox Chase Hall." "What's that?" Banner asked. "A school?" "Yeah, a finishing school for girls. It's the nearest place to ours. Her name is Joan Vickers, ain't it, Wayne? He met her down by the creek a couple of times. He thinks it's love." Wayne's cheeks were as red as a valentine heart. "The center ain't interested in that, Hud," he said resentfully. "Ain't he, though?" Hudson persisted. "I ain't," said Banner. He patted his punch-bowl tummy. "Which way's the kitchen?" "I'll get something for you," Celeste said hurriedly. "Wayne, straighten out one of the rooms upstairs for the senator." Wayne went back out through the sliding doors. Hudson followed Celeste into the kitchen. All this time, Skinner had kept a keen-eyed vigil on Banner. "There isn't much to go on, is there?" said Skinner. Banner hitched up his pants. "What kind of damsel was this Beverly Jelk?" "Not bad-looking, not bad at all." Skinner paused to think about it. "I knew her all her life. She was a tomboy, always running around barefoot and going fishing. Her favorite pastime was horseshoe pitching, and she was expert at it. She was clever and heartless." There were plenty of rooms in the house. After a cold supper, Banner followed Celeste up a dark stairwell. Celeste lit a dim light in the upper hall. They passed one locked door. It was Beverly's room. Banner eyed the steel-springed cot, the feather mattress, and the fat pillow. Inconveniences never fazed him. Celeste said good night softly and left him. He tossed his toilet articles on top of a pine bureau. From his pocket, he'd taken a straight razor with a bone handle, a shaving brush, and a toothbrush for his upper plate. He jimmied off his shoes and threw them away from him. They landed like kegs of nails. He dropped his clothes in piles on the floor. There was a crazy quilt on the cot. The night was getting cool. He pulled the quilt over him and went to sleep. At 1:45, Banner bounced like a gutta-percha ball into a sitting position. The echoes of a shot were still reverberating. He swung his feet over the side of the cot, feeling for his pants. As he tangled himself up in red suspenders, he heard doors slam and feet running inside the house. He kicked his feet into the widely flung brogans and scrambled down the stairs without a shirt on. The others were already clustered on the porch step. Celeste sobbed hysterically. Banner pushed his way through and looked down on the step. In the moonlight, Hudson Jelk lay sprawled with part of his scalp and his face blown away by buckshot. Wayne Marks got a quilt and covered the body with it. Skinner, who had also decided to stay overnight, phoned to Cow Crossing for a wagon to take the body away. Banner, consoling Celeste in a fatherly way, took her to her room and made her lie down. He came downstairs again to study the ground in front of the porch step. Skinner came out and looked stupidly at Banner. 2 murders were getting to be too much for the legal lights of Cow Crossing. "There's some footprints," said Banner. "We'll have to wait till it gets daylight to follow them." "Do you think we can?" questioned Skinner, doubtfully. Banner was grim. We can use a couple of hounds. He raised his head as if to listen. Skinner and Wayne listened too, and understood. The dogs were strangely silent. The sound of the shot had stirred them up a bit, but they soon grew still. Wayne said, "We had a housebreaker came one night, and the hounds bellered till dawn." He shook himself. "All right if I take a look around, Senator?" "Suit yourself," said Banner. The hired man melted into the dense shadows. In time, a wagon came with a fussy coroner who bawled everybody out merely for being there. Finally, Hudson's body was taken away to keep his sister company. Banner and Skinner went into the farmhouse. They could hear Celeste still crying in her room. Skinner went up to offer a few words of comfort. Wayne came into the parlor looking ashen under his sunburn. "I just saw something," he gulped. Banner eyed him narrowly. "I was wandering among the fruit trees," went on Wayne. "I saw something moving, flitting. It seemed to have a human shape, and it was luminous." "Luminous?" "It gave off a glow." "Did you get near enough to—" No, it was gone in a flash." Wayne turned abruptly towards the door. "I'm going to bed." Banner heard his feet stumble on the stairs. No one knew if Banner went back to bed again that night or not. He didn't. The first pink of dawn sifted through the heavy screens on the parlor windows. Banner heard a sound of pots and pans in the kitchen. He went in and found Celeste preparing breakfast. She'd cried herself out, and now managed to present a weak smile. Skinner and Wayne came down shortly afterwards. Skinner looked more than his 60 years. Wayne was as fresh as if he had had a full night's sleep. "That's what age does to you," thought Banner. "Get us a doublet of hounds," Banner said. Wayne brought a pair on chain leashes to the front of the house. The footprints of the killer were plain in the early light. The hounds caught the scent, and they bayed like muffled bells. The footprints went on and on, past the storage shed and out towards the open fields. The trackers pressed into a clump of sassafras, the hounds sniffing confidently. The murderer's heavy, ungainly shoes made perfect impressions in the loam. They crossed some shale where the prints disappeared, but the pace of the hounds never slackened. They came to the edge of a field, newly plowed for winter wheat. The dogs stood motionless and stopped baying. There was bafflement in their melancholy eyes. They whimpered and quivered. "What the devil's the matter with them?" snapped Skinner irritably. He saw that the others were looking ahead at the footprints that went off across the freshly turned soil. A single line of prints they were. And they led straight to a gaunt scarecrow that stood some 40 feet off, idly flapping its empty arms at them. They trudged back to the house silently. Banner couldn't get the scarecrow out of his mind. He had gone out to it and stood looking at it, flabbergasted. The trail had stopped there. The scarecrow was well dressed, as scarecrows go. It had on a frayed-brimmed straw hat. Its face was an old flour bag with 2 lopsided holes punched in it for eyes, a triangular nose, and a crayon mouth that resembled the teeth of a rake. The coat hung limply from stick shoulders. At the sleeve cuffs were pinned soiled white cotton gloves. The legs of the loose pants fluttered gently in the morning breeze. A pair of battered shoes with heavy soles stood within a foot of each other under the scarecrow. They fitted the tracks. The footprints had made fools of them. Each print was sharp and clear. It hadn't been a case of using the same prints twice, for going and coming. Banner said suddenly, "Was that scarecrow always in that field?" "No," said Wayne. "That's the one that used to be in Beverly's vegetable patch." As they drew near the house, a man came out of it to meet them. He was as fleshless as a hoe handle, and had hair like singed cotton and a dehydrated face. In short, he was the ugliest gaffer Banner had ever seen. Banner leaned his head towards Skinner. "Who's this, Judge?" "Gloriana! He's as ugly as a—" He stopped short, for something had clicked in his mind. Skinner grinned, without humor. "Why don't you go ahead and say it, Senator? As ugly as a scarecrow. We know that. His appearance has been against him ever since he was a kid. He isn't as bad an actor as he looks. He's Hudson's uncle, Magnus Fawkes." "What did you find?" croaked Uncle Magnus as he met them. Banner said, "The murderer's out in the field. Anyone can go arrest him. He ain't gonna run away. But how can you jail a wraith? An empty suit of clothes? It's the scarecrow. Let's eat." They all went into a profusion of eggs and bacon and cornbread. Banner regretted that there was no black coffee, but Celeste had made excellent hot cocoa. Banner thought hard. He didn't talk to Uncle Magnus, who got the story from the others piecemeal. Banner suddenly cut in. "Where were you buzzing last night, Unc?" Uncle Magnus turned a pair of haddock eyes in his direction. "After I heard Beverly got killed," he said, "I went off settling affairs." "In other words," said Banner, "I can take that or leave it." He jabbed his fork into the yolk of another sunny side up. "I don't mean nothing," said Uncle Magnus, "but I'm not sure a city man like you'll get any place among us yokels." "Who's a city man?" grunted Banner. "Listen, Karloff, I was born on a farm. I left it 'cause it was too quiet. I like lots of noise. There's lots of noise hereabouts, what with shotguns going off at regular intervals." Celeste began to gather up the breakfast plates. Banner said to her, "Those groceries stick to the ribs, young'un. Thank you kindly, ma'am. I'll help you with the crockery." Celeste was scandalized. "Oh, no, no, Senator, please, sit still. I'll take that. Oh—" But Banner wasn't easily discouraged. He trotted into the large kitchen with a tottering pagoda of cups and saucers, and plopped them into a dishpan of hot, soapy water. It was a new experience for Celeste to wash dishes with a senator. He was full of funny stories, and soon she was laughing. Before she knew it, she was telling Banner about Uncle Magnus. Uncle Magnus, she said, had a grievance against nearly everybody. For all his life, he'd either been shunned or made fun of. "You won't believe," she said, "that he once tried to make love to me." "Why, the nasty old home wrecker." "Oh, no, that was before I was married. He wanted to marry me. Of course, I refused him as gently as I could." So Uncle Magnus and his nephew were once rivals for Celeste's hand. And now the nephew was dead. Was it the revenge of the scarecrow? It was dusk, and they began to light the lights. Celeste was sitting in the parlor with Banner and Skinner. Skinner seemed reluctant to leave the farm. Celeste's hands were twisting nervously in her lap. Her fingernails were chewed short. She looked straight into Skinner's metallic eyes. "Black Marsh is mine now, isn't it, Judge?" "Legally, it is," nodded Skinner. "Then I'm going to sell it to you," she blurted. "I want to get away. I want to get rid of this place tonight. Will you still buy it?" Skinner glanced quizzically at Banner. who didn't say anything. "It's a little unusual," said Skinner, "what with everyone involved in a murder case, but I'm the law and I can make it stand. My offer is $5,000, as you know." Celeste stood up. "That's more than plenty." "I'll have to go to Cow Crossing to get the money," Skinner said eagerly, getting up. "Excuse me." He took his mangy beaver off the hat rack, grabbed up his hawthorn stick, and presently they heard his horse and buggy crunch down the gravel drive. Celeste looked appealingly at Banner. "It's been a hard day. Do you mind if I go upstairs for a rest, Senator?" "Run right along, baby bunting." She smiled gratefully at him. He followed her out of the parlor and watched her go quickly up the stairs, into the dark. Near the top, he saw her hesitate, and he plainly heard her startled, "Oh!" His bulk traveled up the stairs at a surprising clip. He stood by her side. "What is it?" he asked. I stubbed my toe," she said. Were there lies in her round eyes? "Are you sure?" he questioned. She laughed nervously. "I'm all right, Senator." She crossed the dark hall and switched on the dim bulb. He watched her walk to one of the rooms and go in, and close the door quietly. He went back down the stairs again. "Something's wrong here. Damn it, it's all wrong. But there ain't gonna be any artful dodging tonight." Uncle Magnus and Wayne were playing Snip, Snap, Snorum on the oilcloth of the kitchen table, and both were yawning. "Thinking of hitting the hay early tonight, neighbors?" asked Banner. They said they were about ready to turn in. "Tonight," said Banner, "I'm going to lock you all up." "Lock us up," the men repeated at the same time. "As a precaution," said Banner. The two card players looked at each other. "As a safeguard for yourselves and the others. Who has the bedroom door keys?" "Celeste," said Uncle Magnus. They got up and stretched. Banner went upstairs and knocked on Celeste's door. She let him in. She was wearing a navy flannel robe over her nightgown. Banner said, "I'm locking all the bedrooms tonight, Celeste. They tell me you have the keys." "Key," she corrected. "All the doors have the same sort of lock. Hudson had a key. This is it." She took a thick-bodied key off her dresser and put it into his hand. He went over to her window and examined it. There were storm shutters that could be closed from the inside and locked. On the outside of the window, a heavy screen was nailed solidly to the casing. To get out that way, the occupant of the room would first have to punch a hole in the screen. "When I go out, I'll lock this door," he said. "If it ain't too warm for you, bolt those shutters." She didn't ask him why. She said good night timidly, and as he went out, he saw her move toward the window. He locked her door. Then he took a heavy chair and jammed the back under the doorknob as an added measure. All the bedrooms were along the same hallway, some on one side and some on the other, but there were no connecting doors between rooms. Banner went in to bid both Uncle Magnus and Wayne separate sleep tights. He looked at both of their windows. They were like Celeste's. The shutters and the screen nailed to the window frame from the outside. He locked both their doors, too, and put chair backs under the doorknobs. Now just let anyone try and get out. He was down in the parlor playing Idiot's Delight, a game of solitaire, when he heard the horse and buggy rattling up the drive. Skinner came in. "Where's Celeste?" he asked. Banner riffled the deck of cards. "She's gone Betty by. You'll have to save it till morning." "Oh, Lord," groaned Skinner wearily. "Do I have to go all the way back to town tonight?" "Now," said Banner, "take the same room you had last night. Go out and unhitch your dapple gray." When Skinner came back into the house, Banner led him upstairs. Banner said, "The people are sleeping in this house tonight under certain conditions, behind locked doors. I'm locking yours." Skinner looked stunned. "Well, then you think that "I'm not thinking anything," said Banner gruffly. "I'm just doing." Assuring himself that Skinner could not get out through the window, Banner turned the key in the lock. Another chairback went under a knob. He padded down to the end of the hall to the stairway and looked back at the 4 bedroom doors, barricaded with chairs. There was one other door that he went to and tried. It opened on Beverly's room, and it was fast. He left the hall light burning. Going into the parlor, he surveyed the scattered cards on the glossy tabletop. "I'm licking you this time," he vowed. Idiot's delight began again. Time had slipped by. Banner might have dozed over his game. A quake shook his whole big body, and he found himself blinking at the sallow face of the grandfather clock. It was past midnight. What had brought him up so sharp? The house was as still as a catacomb. Then he heard something that chilled him to the very marrow. In the upper hall, where the bedrooms were situated, someone was walking. Someone was walking in the hall, and yet he had locked them all in. He could hear the sound of each shoe as it came down on the hall runner. It was a clumping sound, as if the shoes were hanging loose on feet that were mere bones. Or sticks. Listening, he reached out and ran all the rows of cards together. He felt glued to the chair, unable to get up. Then came a scream. It was Celeste, and the shotgun roared. Banner heaved himself up clumsily, and the heavy table rocked. The glass lamp teetered dangerously and then toppled to the floor. The smashing of the bulb brought blackness crashing down. Banner groped across the fallen lamp and found the sliding doors. He pushed them wider and scrambled for the stairs. He came, puffing, to the top. The dimly lit hallway was exactly as he left it. The 4 chairs were still propped against the 4 doors. A spasm of bewilderment shook him. Then he heard weak rapping on the inside of Celeste's door. He plunged towards it, pulling the key out of his pocket. He flung the tightly jammed chair aside and keyed open the door. Celeste was on the floor, half unconscious, her breath coming shallowly. A faint trickle of blood showed deep red on her whitened face. Automatically, Banner shut his eyes to the window. The storm shutters were bolted on the inside. The boxed-in air reeked of discharged gunpowder, but there was no shotgun. He bent over Celeste, noting that it was a grazing head wound she'd suffered, while dimly into his consciousness came the steady sound of hammering. The 3 male sleepers, trapped in their rooms, were pounding on the doors. Banner ignored them. He brought water in a basin and bathed Celeste's face. It didn't look so bad with the blood washed away. Still, her scalp was torn, and there were powder burns. She stopped groaning and opened her eyes. She clutched blindly at Banner's arm with both hands. "The scarecrow! It was in here! It shot me!" "Easy now, child. How'd the scarecrow get in?" She looked dumbfounded. "I don't know. I don't know. I left the light on after I had locked the shutters. I went to bed. Finally, I went to sleep. I woke up with a start. It was standing right there at the foot of my bed. I almost died of fright. But when I saw the shotgun pointing at my head, It made me throw myself forward to wrench it out of the thing's hands or to spoil the aim. It seemed to go off right in my face. I guess I fainted. When I was myself again, I was alone in the room, trying to get out." She was frightfully weak from shock. Banner left her on the bed while he went to examine the shutter bolt. There was nothing tricky about it. The screen outside the window was intact, and the lock on the door hadn't been tampered with. Banner went out into the hall, took the chairs away from the other doors, and let the three men out. They peppered him with questions. All he said was, "The Scarecrow got into Celeste's room." "That finishes me with this house," said Uncle Magnus. "I'm taking Celeste to a doctor." "Wait a minute," snapped Banner. "No wandering off, Unc, till I give you the checkered flag. We're all sticking together, like the Rover boys." He led them back to Celeste's room. "Uncie'll take you to town," he said to Celeste. "I want to go and never come back," she said. "But there's one thing I haven't told you, Senator. You know that time when I was going up the stairs? You asked me why I'd stopped." "Yep." "It was something I saw." "What did you see?" "It was just a white figure. That's all I can tell you. It was gone in an instant. When you asked me what happened, I wasn't sure I really had seen anything. I thought perhaps I was so nervous I'd imagined it. But now, I don't think so." Banner nodded soberly. He said to Skinner and Uncle Magnus, "You two stay here with Celeste. Wayne, we'll hitch your horse to the shay." They went out of the house and started toward the stable. They drew up short. Ahead of them on the path stood the empty, grotesque Scarecrow. It stood on its pole, taunting them. Banner heard Wayne breathe heavily beside him. "The hounds," he was muttering. "They never barked." Celeste and Uncle Magnus, to the pound of horses' hooves, were gone towards Cow Crossing. The three remaining men huddled like sheep in the parlor. Banner went to a wall phone and said to a sleepy operator, "Wake up, Rip, and give me Fox Chase Hall." Wayne looked at him in mute surprise. Banner got one of the lady instructors on the wire after a lengthy wait. "Listen, Trixie," he said, "I'm calling a roll. You got a girl there named Joan Vickers. Am I right or wrong?" "You're incomprehensible, whoever you are," was the reply. "But you're right. She's a member of my American literature class." "Is she in the school now?" "Of course she's in the school now." "I'm still taking stock, sister. Put her on." "I'll transfer your call to her dormitory." Banner heard a click and a dull buzzing. Then a lazy, blonde voice came on the line. "Who's this?" said Banner. "A girl." "Joan Vickers?" "No, one of her classmates." "Girlie, put Joni on." There was a pause. Then the girl said, "I can't. She isn't here." "Where is she, playmate?" "Lord knows," said the girl. "Who are you, her old mandarin?" "No, this is Senator Banner." "I guess I can tell you what we think. She got pretty mushy with a farm boy named Wayne Marks. All last week she was starry-eyed and telling us she planned to elope with him. When she didn't come back the other day, we all guessed she'd gone and done it. We've been covering up for her. Isn't that romantic? Or are you just an old fuddy?" "I'm an old fuddy," he said. He hung up. He wheeled on Wayne. "Did you elope with Joan Vickers?" "Elope!" cried Wayne. "No such luck. I haven't seen her for days." "The gals at Fox Chase Hall think you've spirited her off." "Oh, I'll see about that." Wayne jumped up impetuously and started for the door. There he paused, expecting Banner to halt him gruffly. Banner was carved from rock. Wayne bolted out. They heard him running. That left Banner and Skinner at the Grange. "Better stick with me," said Banner, starting to follow Wayne out. Skinner stuck with him. They went past the storage shed, where Banner picked up a bullseye lantern. The horses stirred in the stable when they went in, the whites of the animals' eyes gleaming. Banner climbed into the loft and kicked the straw around. He came down again and eyed the pile of horse blankets. In a few minutes, they went out into the night again. "Skinner," said Banner, "the Scarecrow's gonna make one more attempt." Skinner's voice sounded as if it were riding the edge of a razor. "Who?" Banner's hand fell heavily on the lean shoulder. "You, Skinner." Skinner's laugh was sickly. "You're clowning." "No, I'm not. You're next. Knowing that, we've got to hamstring the Scarecrow." Skinner almost sobbed. "Well, if you know that much, you know who the Scarecrow is." "I do, pal." "Well, for mercy's sake, Senator Banner, who is it?" Banner shook his head. "It's no use. You wouldn't believe me." They were halfway to the house, in a wide open spot. Banner said, "You're bait, Skinner. As long as I'm with you, you're safe. That goes for me, too. The Scarecrow won't tackle two of us. But I'm going to leave you alone." "No," begged Skinner. "Don't leave me." "Scaredy cat. I'll only pretend to. We'll go back to the parlor. Then I'll tell you I'm returning to the stable. I'll go out and run around to the side of the house and come in the window. Then we'll wait for the Scarecrow. The Scarecrow's forced to act tonight, now, if anything's to be accomplished." Banner helped Skinner, shaking and white-faced, back into the parlor, where Skinner flopped weakly in a chair. Banner prowled to the window and loosened the screen. Then he went to the sliding doors and said in a voice that must have carried all the way to the barn, "No use your staying, Skinner. I'll put you dobbin between the shafts, and you can jog back to town." "Yes," said Skinner, in a choked voice. "Pull these doors closed after me," continued Banner loudly. "It'll only take me 10 minutes. Skinner got up and slid the doors closed. Banner went out on the porch and let his footsteps die away in the direction of the stable. In an incredibly short space of time, Banner, puffing and blowing, appeared at the side window. He came wriggling into the room like a walrus. "This is what comes of eating too much strawberry shortcake," he whispered, smothering a chuckle. Skinner was collapsed in the rocker by the table, in the center of the room. Banner pulled a chair close to the sliding doors, now closed, sat down, and began to wait. 1 minute went by. 2 minutes. 3 minutes. Skinner, rooted to his chair, looked horrified at the crack slowly appearing between the two doors beside Banner. There was not a sound. The crack got wider. White-gloved fingers pushed their squirming way in, and then a hand rested between the doors. Banner never moved. The white-gloved hand was withdrawn, and gradually the double barrels of a shotgun slid through, the invisible gunner drawing a bead on Skinner's head. Then, like lightning, Banner's hand shot out and seized the barrels and forced them up. The shotgun roared, and buckshot riddled the ceiling. Banner slammed one of the double doors back and followed the gun out into the front hall. Skinner uprooted himself. He had to see. He was behind Banner. Then his senses almost failed him. Struggling in Banner's iron grip, her face distorted with rage, was Beverly Jelk. Daybreak was spreading over the sky like a pale stain. Banner faced Skinner in the jurisconsult's office above Main Street. Banner said everything indicated that the body found in the creek was Bev's. Her clothes were on a bank. Her ring was on her hand. Generally, the physique and coloring were Bev's. But exact identification of the features wasn't possible, because as you told me, the buckshot had smeared most of the face. Wayne saw a luminous figure in the fruit trees. Bare flesh gives off a glow in the moonlight. The person Wayne saw was naked. Then there was the peculiar stillness of the hounds, though the hideous scarecrow cavorted all over the place. There's only one answer to that. The hounds knew who the scarecrow was. It was a person they were thoroughly used to. But it was the attempt on Celeste, while all the doors were locked, that settled it for me. Nobody could have gotten out of those 4 rooms. That proved the murderer was still on the outside. The murderer, then, was someone who had complete run of the grounds, and whom the dogs regarded as a master. Everyone at the Grange was eliminated except one person, Beverly Jelk. That's why I told you the answer was unbelievable. But, taking it as true, whose body was found in the creek? Remember that Wayne caught sight of Bev running naked through the trees after the second murder. Why was she naked? 'Cause she'd left all her clothes on a bank. Why didn't she put on her victim's clothes? 'Cause her victim had been wearing nothing but a bathing suit. She'd come down to the creek in a bathing suit. Who finds the creek that convenient? It wasn't anybody from the Grange. They were all accounted for. The nearest other place is Fox Chase Hall. It was one of the school gals. And we knew that Joan Vickers had come down to the creek occasionally. Could it be Joan Vickers they found in the creek? I checked later and found her missing. We can see now that Bev needed clothes. She couldn't get back into the house immediately. All that was available was the scarecrow rig. She put that on. Bev, as heartless as she's painted, had killed Joan to pave the way to the more important murder of her brother. To murder Hudson, she made some disturbance outside the farmhouse while all of us were asleep, and when he came to the porch to investigate, she let him have it with the kitchen shotgun. Before she vamoosed, she removed a bedroom key from Hudson's pocket. It had been her key. Hudson had taken it from the body in the mortuary, along with the rest of Bev's effects, earlier that day. Then Bev began to play tricks. She left a broad trail from Hudson's body. This trail petered out at some shale at the edge of the plowed field. At least we couldn't see any more footprints at that point, but the hounds were still able to follow the trail by the scent. Then Bev hit us between the eyes with the footprints in the newly plowed field. What she did was simple. She wanted us to see with our own eyes where the trail led, so that we'd call off the hounds. She was standing there dressed as the scarecrow. She had to get that scarecrow 40 feet inside the field, with only one set of shoe tracks leading up to it. First, she made a crosspiece of a couple of dead branches to hang the ragged clothes on. Then, she took off the scarecrow shoes she was wearing and continued barefoot out into the field for another 40 feet. She took off her clothes and set up the scarecrow the way we found it. All except the shoes. She put the heavy shoes on again and walked backwards to the edge of the field, where she started from. She stepped carefully on each bare footprint, the one she'd made walking into the field. We didn't think right off that large shoe tracks can completely blot out slighter, bare footprints. We have Bev standing nude on the rim of the plowed field, the scarecrow 40 feet from her, and a pair of shoes in her hand. How'd she get the shoes out under the scarecrow? Horseshoe pitching, is her favorite sport. You told me that. She could put him in pretty close at 40 feet, couldn't she, Skinner? Banner chuckled. During the day, she hid out in the stable or the barn and kept herself covered with straw and horse blankets. She ate raw carrots, kale, and broccoli from her vegetable garden. Skinner interrupted. But why did she want to kill me? She wanted to get away from the farm with the $5,000 you were willing to offer for it. Since Hudson was dead, he could no longer raise an objection to the sale. Celeste would want to sell out, and you'd bring the money to the farm. Bev had to have that money to start over again somewhere else. There was no use going away without it. She knew she had to kill you for it. Bev had finally slipped into the house and into her room by the time you and Celeste had come to that sale agreement in the parlor. Bev had dressed herself in some of her own clothes. She was up on the stairs, listening to us. She knew you were going to get the money that night. Then Celeste ran quickly up the stairs, and Bev ducked back into the dark to hide herself. But Celeste caught a glimpse of Bev, though she didn't know who it was. For all Bev knew, Celeste had spotted her and knew she was still alive. So Bev had to put your killing on her waiting list. She had to erase Celeste first. As you can see, there really was no problem of getting out of the locked rooms. The Scarecrow was outside all the time. The shoes on her feet sounded loose as she walked down the hall, for they were far too big for her. She removed the chair I'd put up and entered Celeste's room with the same key she'd taken off Hudson's body. She intended to blast Celeste full of buckshot. But Celeste defended herself. Bev couldn't stay for a second shot. She had to get out and leave things the way I'd set them before I could stomp up the stairs. Bev was hard-pressed. To get the money, she had to kill you before you left the Grange last night. Her hand was forced. So, she fell into my trap. "Come into my parlor," said the flies to the spider. Joseph Cummings. Born in New York in 1913, Joseph Cummings is today almost forgotten outside a diminishing circle of aficionados of impossible crime fiction. After a brief spell as a journalist, he began his sporadic and very varied writing career during the Second World War on overseas postings with the U.S. Air Force. Initially, he wrote to entertain his comrades, and on being demobbed, he must have been delighted to find a ready market in the so-called pulps, such as Western Trails, Hollywood Detective, Mystery Digest, and Killer's Mystery Story magazine. His crime fiction is characterized by undeniably improbable situations, unfeasibly trusting witnesses, and extraordinarily clever solutions. In one story, the murderer might appear to be a vampire, and in another, a giant. But what truly lifts his work out of the run-of-the-mill is Cummings' sense of humor. Cummings' best-known character is Brooks Urban Banner, a senator in the Democratic Party, who is also a criminal lawyer and a practicing magician. Banner is modeled very much in the style of John Dixon Carr's heroic sleuth, Dr. Gideon Fell, himself inspired by G.K. Chesterton, and is extra large in every sense. He weighs nearly 300 pounds, has a mop of shaggy white hair, and dresses loudly. Fond of tall tales, the senator claims to have had all manner of careers, including hobo, locksmith, and comic book enthusiast, which provides some of the arcane knowledge that allows him to unravel the baffling mysteries with which he is confronted. While he doesn't appear in any novel-length investigations, there are over 30 Banner short stories. 15 of these were gathered together by the late Bob Adie, the authority on impossible crime stories, and form the collection Banner Deadlines, Crippen and Landru, 2004. A second volume is forthcoming. Commings's non-Banner stories, of which there are at least 40, some written under pseudonyms, are mostly mysteries, sometimes with an unusual setting, but none captures the eccentric genius of the Banner canon. As a writer, Joe Commings is sometimes criticized for an overly frivolous approach to the business of murder. That was, of course, quite deliberate. In a letter to the New York Times Book Review, published in 1941, Commings protested that the vast majority of publishing houses were uninterested in publishing anything humorous, and therefore unwilling to accept his whimsical wares. As he was unwilling to write in any other way, his work remained largely confined to the pulps, while a few novel-length manuscripts also failed to find a publisher. In his 50s, Commings supplemented his income from crime fiction by writing pornographic paperbacks, with titles like Man-Eater, 1965, Operation Aphrodite, 1966, and Swinging Wives, 1971, as well as a study of sex crimes, whose aim seems to have been titillation more than education. In the early 1970s, Joe Commings suffered a stroke, and his writing career came to an end. He moved to a care home in Maryland, where he died in 1992. The Scarecrow Murders was originally published in 10 Story Detective magazine in April 1948.